Today we come back to the life of Joseph, and this is our third part in the life of Joseph, and we are calling this study just simply Prayer, Faith, Jesus, or not prayer, Problem, Faith, and Jesus, Problems, Faith, and Jesus, because we see that repeated time and time again throughout the life story of Joseph. Back in 1987, and for those of you who are wondering, yes, that was after the Revolutionary War. But back in 1987, a guy in our church invited me to come by his house after church, to his family's house. He had built out a room in his house that he wanted me to see, and it was a dark room. Now, I wasn't so interested in the dark room, but I was very interested in his sister. And so after church, I was at his house, and 37 years later, I'm still very interested in his sister. But went to his dark room. Now, if you aren't familiar with what a dark room is, let me just tell you. And by the way, if you were born in the last 25, 30 years, you probably would have no reason to know what a dark room is. But a dark room was where you processed film. You may say, okay, well, what's film? And if you were born in the last 25, 30 years, you probably have no reason to know what film is. But let me tell you, film is what you would load into a camera. And you say, wait a minute, camera's on my phone, you don't have to have film. You don't anymore. But back in 1987, you had to have film in the camera. And there may be room for, I can't remember exactly, seems like it was 12 or 24 pictures, something like that. And you could take your camera with the film in it, and you could take those pictures, 24 of them, if that's how many was available, and then when you were finished, you would wind the film all the way to where none of it was exposed to the light. You would take the film out of the camera, and you would take it to a person who had a dark room or a company that had a dark room, and they would process and develop the film for you. And it was really neat work. You would get your film back in those days, anywhere from 1 to 2 weeks later. You didn't know what was on the film. I mean, you knew the pictures you took, but you didn't know if they were good or not. And by the way, if you were a wedding photographer, you were just praying during that time that your film was in the dark room, that it was going to come out well. That everything was going to be in focus, that everything was going to be beautiful, that everything was going to be centered well. You were just praying because there was no do-overs. And once you did it, it was done. You couldn't just look at your camera and say, oh, that's a bad one, scratch that and start over. It's a different world back then. It was an incredible thing to learn that night how much took place in the dark room. How you would take this raw product, the film, and you would work it through the different stages of the dark room, transforming it from the film into a negative and eventually into the pictures that you could hold in your hand, the final product. You could look at it and say, oh, yeah, those are really good, or wow, that didn't turn out so well. So much took place in the dark room. I was thinking about that in relationship to our lives, in relationship to the story of Joseph. And I thought how often we find ourselves in the darkroom experiences of life. In these dark times of life where troubles just hit, and it's so hard, it's so difficult. Certainly Joseph experienced many of those times. And you may say, well, why would that happen? I've heard people going through dark times, and I totally get it. This is not criticism. Please understand that. I totally get it. They would say, you know, I don't understand why this is happening to me. I don't get it. I'm living well. I'm living right. And why is this happening to me? Why is this so hard? This past week, I was talking with someone who is dealing with cancer and having a real rough time with it. And the comment that was made by this person was, well, why not me? I mean, it's happening to people all over the world. Why wouldn't it be me? At least I've got Jesus to go with me through this process, to get me through it where other people may not have Him. Why wouldn't it be me? that's facing this. I love that response. I get the other, but I love that response. Because I think something happens when we take the focus off of ourselves. I think something really important happens in those dark times when we stop focusing on me and we start looking at other people. We get our attention off of ourselves and we see what's going on in the lives of other people. But why would we have dark times anyway? I mean, why would that happen in this world? Why would God allow that to happen in this world? I think that's an important question to ask and then to answer. The short answer of why is simply because of sin. You think about it. You say, no, God intended it to be this way. God allows things to happen. He works in relationship to the evil that's in the world to bring about what He wants to develop, what He wants to transpire. But what caused this evil, what caused these bad things to happen in life is sin. The Bible says that when Adam and Eve rebelled against God and broke His commandment, as by one man, sin entered the world. And death pursued after that. Therefore, death is passed upon all men because all have sinned. The reason we have problems in this world, the reason we're not living in the perfect Garden of Eden right now, is because man decided to go his own way instead of God's way. Man rebelled against God, and in that rebellion, what took place was a fallen world that brought about difficulty for fallen people. I think it's important to get a better understanding of why these things happen. I think it's important if we're going to survive dark times, and by the way, there may be many of us in the auditorium right now who are facing dark times. You may be going through something right now that is so overwhelming to you, you're just wondering, how am I going to make it through tomorrow? So how do you survive that? And it doesn't even matter if you're responsible for the problem. You see, God allows things to happen for, let's say, 3 reasons. Number 1 is discipline. Sometimes we end up in the darkroom experiences in these dark times simply because we have rebelled against God. And what does God do? He uses it as a means of discipline in our lives. His desire is to shake us, to awaken us to what's happening, to where we say, I don't ever want to repeat that. I don't ever want to go through that again. God, help me. Help me to stay close to you. Help me not to stray from you anymore. I don't want to have to go through that mess again. So God uses dark times to discipline. God also uses dark times to prepare us. He uses them to prepare us for something that's coming ahead. We see that in the life of Joseph. Something was on the horizon. Joseph needed to be ready for it. Joseph needed to be in a position to where he was ready to bring salvation not only to his family, I'm not talking about spiritual salvation, but physical salvation, to bring salvation not only to his family, not only to Egypt, but to most of the known world during that time. We'll see that eventually in this series. God uses it to prepare us, but not only to prepare us for something that's ahead, but to prepare us to benefit other people. Down the road, you can rest assured you're not the only one that faces these things. Down the road, there's going to be somebody that comes into your life. God orchestrates it, brings them into your life who is facing the same thing you've gone through. And you're going to be able to speak into their life in a way that I never can because I've not been there. You're going to be able to talk to them in a way that I could not possibly talk to them because I've never had that experience. And God is going to use you greatly because you've gone through these dark times. God also uses it to develop us, equip us, prepare us to make us more like His Son, Jesus Christ. That ought to be the goal of every believer, that every day I live, whether I'm in a good time or a bad time, every day I live, I want to be more like Jesus at the end of the day than I was at the start. God will use dark times to get us in a place of, insecurity, personal insecurity. God will use dark times to get us in a place of total dependency upon Him. To where we draw closer to Him day by day. We're going to see that play out in our study. I think there are 4 things that we need to know if we're going to survive dark days. 4 things. If we're going to survive these darkroom experiences, 4 things we really need to know and we need to embrace. We don't just need to have a head knowledge of these. We need to anchor them in our lives, to sink them in our lives to where we begin to see, yes, this is exactly what's taking place here. The first one I'm going to give you is a tough one to swallow, but it's reality. So what are we talking about? Number 1, if you're taking notes, jot this down. I hope you are taking notes today. Number 1, we need to understand in order to survive dark times that God permits dark times. God permits them. God permits them. Now, I mentioned it a minute ago, but let me tell you again. God will take the evil that other people intend for us and will use it in a way that we can't understand, that we can't possibly see. He will take it and use it for His honor and for His glory and for the good of those who love Him. It's an incredible thing God does. He has an ability to see the future. He has an ability to see way beyond what my eyes can see. When I get stuck in the middle of something that is really hard and something that is really difficult, I have a tendency to only be able to see so far. These dark times, it's hard for me to focus my eyes on anything other than the problem in my life. And yet God sees so far beyond it. He says, I let you go through this for a reason. Let me read to you our text. Genesis chapter 39, we're going to read the first 5.5 verses. We're not going to complete verse 6 because that gets into next week's study. So let me read this to you. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, however you say it, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard. Pay careful attention to that. Now, I'm going to point that out in just a little bit. Captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man. And he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And listen to this. And the master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight and served him. Then Potiphar made him overseer of his house, made Joseph overseer of his house, and all that he had he put under his authority. So it was, from the time that he had made him overseer of his house and all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessings of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and in the field. Thus he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he did not know what he had except for the bread which he ate. Okay, so last week we just started into this part of the situation. Joseph's brothers were out taking care of the sheep. His dad said, Joseph, why don't you go check on your brothers, bring me a report. What's going on in their lives? And Joseph obediently left, went to check on his brothers. And the Bible says that his brothers saw him coming from a distance, and they determined, we're going to kill this sucker. We're going to kill him. We're going to take him out. But something happened in the process that God was working in this situation. And instead of killing Joseph, they threw him into a pit. Let's just leave him there. Throw him down in that pit. He's not going to get out. The chances of somebody wandering by and finding him are pretty slim. Let's just leave him in the pit and let him die, and we don't have to do it physically. Well, about that time, a group of Ishmaelite traders came down the road, and As they were passing through the fields where the brothers of Joseph were, keeping the sheep and the goats and the other herds that they might have had at their disposal there, they saw them coming, and Judah said, you know what, guys, let's don't kill him. What profit is there in that for us? Let's take him out and sell him to those people. Can you imagine such wickedness? And so they did. They sold him to the Ishmaelites. The Ishmaelites took Joseph into Egypt and sold him there to Potiphar. Joseph is now a slave. And what was God doing there in this process? I mean, was God up in heaven wringing his hands thinking, oh no. I mean, I knew that his brothers had this in their heart. I knew they were wicked and they were evil and they wanted to do bad, but I just didn't think they would follow through on it. I can't believe this. Joseph is now a slave. What am I going to do now? You know, sometimes when we're in the middle of darkness, that's all we can think about. God has deserted us. But how important it is for us to come to a place of understanding that, no, God's got a plan for what's happening. God is much bigger than me. God is much bigger than this circumstance. God is much more forth-thinking than what I can see in my little mind. God knows where this is going. I'm just going to trust Him in this process. God permitted the evil to come into his life. God had a reason. The second thing we see, and the second main point, if you want to jot this down, and I think it's so vital for us to understand this if we're going to survive dark days. Number two is that God's presence is enhanced during dark times. God's presence is enhanced during dark times. Now, okay, let me pause for a second because I understand. You start into a time of darkness, a time of difficulty, a time of sorrow, a time of hurt, a time of physical problems, whatever the case may be, a time where you feel betrayed or let down, where there is anger and bitterness in your life. The first thing you may recognize in that darkness is, I don't sense God's presence. I don't know where God is in this. I think about Joseph going through this mess. And the verse we read last week in chapter 46 of Genesis, we haven't gotten to that yet in our study. We will come across that eventually. But where the brothers had gotten in trouble and they said to one another, we know why this is happening. Now I'm paraphrasing. We know why this is happening. It's because of what we did to our brother. We saw the anguish in his eyes when he begged us not to do this. And we wouldn't listen. As I've gotten older, I've gotten a little softer. I'm not talking just around the waist. I'm talking emotionally. I've gotten a little softer than what I used to be. Hearing what must have been going on in the heart and the mind of Joseph almost brings me to tears for him. Just to think about the anguish that he was going through, the hurt. And I think about Joseph in that situation. This wasn't going off to some retreat. Joseph, we're sending you away for a couple of weeks to camp. Joseph, as far as we're concerned, we will never see you again, and we're okay with that. And you're going to be a slave to somebody who doesn't know you, who doesn't like you, who thinks that your very heart is to somehow get away from him. And so he's going to be hard on you like nobody's business. I can imagine that when it first started, Joseph was wondering, where is God? Now, this is just me reading into the text. It doesn't say that. But it's just me reading into what I see that Joseph must have been so hurt, so betrayed, so let down. And he was probably wondering, God, where are you? And we don't know how long that went, how long it was before we get to verse 2 in this story, where it says, and the Lord was with Joseph. There was the appearance of the absence of God. But Joseph had come across a truth, I believe, in this moment. The truth that God has promised, I will never leave you and I will never forsake you. I will not abandon you in your difficulty. I will not abandon you when you are hurt and when you feel let down and when you are dealing with grief on a level that most people will not know. I have not abandoned you. I may separate as far as the feeling of the presence of God in your life so that I can test you for a moment. The blessing we have in dark times is that regardless of how it may seem, God is always there. He's always there. The second truth I believe that Joseph came across was not only is God always there, but he's got a reason for this mess. Got a reason. I don't believe that when it started, Joseph saw all that. I don't believe when it started that Joseph could somehow rationally come to the thought in the middle of his anguish, in the middle of his hurt, in the middle of his betrayal, and say, you know what? Yeah, this is painful and this is not going to be an enjoyable experience, but God's got a reason for this. I believe he did get to that point. In fact, I know he did. We can tell by the way he was diligent in serving God. God had a reason. And Joseph got to experience the enhanced presence of God in his life like he had never known it before. I liken this situation to that of the disciples. Do you remember that on one occasion Jesus told his disciples, said, I want you to get in the boat and I want you to go across the other side of the sea. And many of them were experienced sailors. This was not a difficult task for them. They got in the boat. They started to cross the sea. They got in the middle of the sea, and what happened? A great storm came up. The wind was blowing so hard, the Bible says that it was pushing the waves up so big that they were crashing into the boat. And the disciples thought they were going to die. We're dead men. What are we going to do about this? And while we're talking about it, where is Jesus in this? Here we are in the most grave situation we've ever been in, and the one time he leaves us alone, stays back to pray and to rest, we're out here in the middle of this storm. Where is Jesus in the middle of this nightmare? And then they looked up, and they saw Jesus coming to them on the very thing that brought them their greatest fear. Saw him walking on the waves to them. You know, for those of us who are part of the family of God, going through a dark time doesn't mean that God has deserted us. I believe that even in those dark times, if we begin adjusting our eyes to what's happening, taking our focus off of ourselves and begin to focus on what God is up to, we'll be able to see God coming to us on that which brings us our greatest fear. There's God. There's the Lord. The Lord was with Joseph. He didn't separate himself because Joseph was now a slave. He was with Joseph in the middle of his slavery. The third thing I think that is important for us to understand if we're going to survive these darkroom experiences is that God uses dark times as a pathway. God uses dark times as a pathway. It's about development. God developing us. God has a plan for what's happening, And the path with which He is taking us to where we need to be runs right through the middle of this darkness. I think the Apostle Paul had come to a place in his life where dark times, and believe me, if you haven't studied the life of the Apostle Paul, you ought to. Talking about a guy that went through dark times. He was beaten, he was imprisoned, he was shipwrecked, he was stoned. Eventually he had his head cut off his body. This guy went through some really dark times. But interestingly enough, the Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 5 and verse 3 says something that initially sounds crazy. Sounds like a lunatic would say it. He said, we also glory in tribulation. We also glory in suffering. We find joy in suffering. Why? Why would you say that, Paul? Because Paul was looking at the pathway that God was using. And so he goes on to say, we also glory in tribulation, knowing that tribulation produces perseverance. Perseverance produces character. Character produces hope. We know that there's a reason for the suffering, and we are able to find joy even in these times of difficulty. Wow. Apostle Paul knew something that I think it's important for us to know. That God is at work to make us more like His Son. God is at work to bring us through difficult times to make us more like His Son. And here's the thing. God is more concerned about our character. God is more concerned about us being like Jesus. God is more concerned about us advancing in our spiritual maturity than He is our comfort. I think one of the worst things that could happen in the life of a believer is for their life to be so smooth. Because God does so much in those dark times. God brings so much into our lives, so much maturity, so much development in those who take their eyes off of themselves and begin to focus on what God is doing in that darkness. I believe it's possible, this may also sound absurd, but I believe it's possible for us to be like the Apostle Paul in that when we enter into these dark times, that we have joy. I don't know that we'll ever get to the place, probably not, that we'll ever get to the place to where we say, oh boy, yes, trouble, problems. I've been betrayed. I've been sold into slavery. Yes, this is great. It's what I was hoping for. We'll probably never get to that place. But I do believe it's possible for us to hold on to our joy in the middle of dark times. Because we know that God has a pathway that's leading us through there to something that is needed in our lives and is far better for us. Final thing I want to point out, and I'm just going to quickly push us through this one. Because I do not believe this is the point of the story. It's in the story, and therefore I think it's beneficial for us to see it, but I don't think it's what's intended to be a main concern for us. It certainly is a nice thing to think about. What am I talking about? Number 4, if you're taking notes, jot this down. God provides blessing in dark times. God provides blessings in dark times. I think that comes in one of two ways. And maybe the two are combined. I believe they are in Joseph's life. Number one, either he reduces the suffering. It's not as great as it could be. I think we see that in Joseph's life. Or else he brings... maybe a good way to say it is he peppers blessings in with the suffering. He sprinkles some blessings in with the suffering. Let me just talk you through Joseph here. So Joseph had been sold into slavery to the captain of the guard. I asked you to remember that little phrase there, the captain of the guard. There are a lot of scholars who believe that when Potiphar is called the captain of the guard, that what they're referring to is that he is the lynch man for Pharaoh. In other words, he's the one who carries out capital punishment. Now, whether that's true, and personally I believe that is true, or whether he is just the leader of the guard that walks people into battle to take care of Pharaoh's business, regardless, he has to some extent, be somewhat cold-hearted. To do what he's asked to do, he has to be somewhat cold-hearted toward it. Don't think for a minute that when Joseph got to Egypt and was sold to Potiphar, Potiphar said, "Man, come on in. I'm so glad you're here. I just want you to know that we think of you as a son, and we just want you to be like one of our children. So you get in here and you help us, you work, and man, we'll just all be a big happy family." What I think was that this hardened soldier said, "Son, let me tell you something. You are nothing but my property. And I have no problem with beating you, with laming you, with throwing you in prison, and I have no problem killing you. You better do your job, and you better do it well." I don't think for a minute that Joseph was treated with kid gloves when he first got there. I think Potiphar wanted him to know the standing, the situation. I am the boss. You are not. If I tell you to do something, you better get to it. In fact, you better be looking for what I'm going to tell you to do before I even tell you. Joseph would have had a very, very difficult life. And since it is true that Potiphar had the right to do whatever he wanted to with his property, Joseph could have easily been beaten to where it lamed him. He could have had his eyes plucked out. He could have been thrown into prison. We're going to see that actually come to pass, but not at this time just yet. He could have easily been put to death. I believe that God was working in the life of Potiphar to bring about a lessening of the potential punishment. Now here's the thing, we may never see that happening. I have said it myself, no doubt many of you have as well. It just can't get any worse than this. It's just about as bad as it can possibly get right now. You know what I have found out when I say that? It is always true that somehow it gets worse. I hope I've gotten to the place in my life to where I stop saying that foolishness. Because what may be really bad for me to somebody else might be a picnic for them. They're going through something that's much worse. God had no doubt lessened the suffering of Joseph. But not only that, we also see that God blessed him in the middle of these difficult times. The Lord was with Joseph, verse 2 says, and he was a successful man. Why was he successful? Was it because he was a hard worker? I believe he was. It says that he served his master. He served him diligently, I believe. But the reason he was successful, the reason we go on down to verse 4 and 5 and then into verse 6 and see that everything Potiphar had, he put in the hands of Joseph. The reason he was so successful was not because Joseph was just such a hard worker, but because God had blessed his life. God had blessed his life. Now, I believe God expected Joseph to be a hard worker. I believe God expects us to serve those for whom we work diligently. I don't think there should ever be a time when we cast embarrassment upon God because we call ourselves Christians and we don't act like it. But God sprinkled the blessings in amongst His suffering. You may say, Tom, I've been in a dark time for a while now and I've not seen those blessings. Now, I've mentioned this a couple of times, but let's crank down on it a little bit. That there is a need to adjust our vision in darkness. When we go from a bright light into darkness, what happens? We lose our vision for a while. We have to eventually adjust to that. How important it is in these darkroom experiences that we adjust our vision. We take our sight off of ourselves. And we focus on what God is up to. It'd be real easy in this situation, God, for me to sit back and have a pity party. It'd be real easy for me in this situation, God, to wonder where you are. Why have you deserted me? But I choose to believe that you've brought me into this for a reason. And that you hold true to your promises. While I may not be experiencing it right now, I may not be able to feel it right now, I cling to your promise in the Word that you will never leave me, you will never forsake me, and no one is going to convince me otherwise. You're with me. You're with me. I trust you. And God, I believe that you've got a pathway that you're leading me through for a reason. And while I don't like what's happening, there's nothing enjoyable about it. And while I don't want to repeat it, I trust you enough to know that you've got a reason for it. It's a purpose. And God, I'm just going to submit to your will, and I'm going to follow you. God, I'm going to follow you. If you're going through a difficult time right now, can I encourage you to cling tightly to God? To remember His promises. To know that He never breaks His promises. To know that you are not alone. God has a plan for what you're facing. We're going to see later on how God was working in Joseph's life to bring him to a place to save so many people. For now, let's just remember that that's what God does.